They say they believe in God with all their heart, yet in the same breath they dismiss their imagination as just pretend. Neville Goddard would call that the greatest contradiction in faith, because if imagination is God in action, then doubting it is like asking for rain while covering your garden with a roof. What you're about to hear isn't another feel-good talk, it's a challenge to the way you've been taught to see prayer, faith, and reality itself. This isn't about thinking positive or wishing hard. It's about understanding that feeling is the secret, and imagination creates reality. And when you finally see that the two are one, your entire relationship with God, and with your own life, changes forever. You've probably met people who claim to have unshakable faith in God, yet when you suggest they use their imagination to shape life, they smile politely, as if it's a child's game. It's almost ironic. Neville Goddard often said imagination is God in action, yet most treat it like a daydream with no real consequence. The contradiction is right there. They say they trust the Creator, but doubt the very tool He gave them to create. It's like praying for a garden and then refusing to plant seeds because seeds are too small to matter. That's what happens when someone believes in divine creative power in theory, but dismisses imagination in practice. The law of assumption tells us your inner state shapes your outer world, but if imagination is treated as make-believe, the process stops before it begins. It's not lack of faith in God, it's lack of faith in His method. I've heard people say, "I believe God can do anything, but I'm not the type to visualize." They don't realize that refusing to live in the end of their desire is like asking for a miracle while keeping the door locked. Neville would shake his head at this, because doubting imagination is doubting the bridge between prayer and fulfillment. And yet, this blind spot is so common that most never question it. Once you see the contradiction, it's hard to unsee it. Faith in imagination isn't optional. It's the very expression of faith in God's nature, which is why Neville's next claim was so radical and why it changed how countless people approach their own inner life. When Neville Goddard said your imagination is God, he wasn't being poetic, he meant it literally. This was his most daring claim, and it shattered the way people thought about prayer, faith, and creation. If imagination creates reality, then every mental image, every inner scene is a direct act of creation through divine power. No middleman, no delay, just the Creator working in and as you. It's not about a distant God watching from the clouds. It's about the divine creative power breathing through your own thoughts and feelings right now. If you've ever wondered why the law of assumption works, it's because the assumption lives in imagination, and imagination is God in motion. It's the unseen hand painting tomorrow's reality with today's inner pictures. Think of it this way. When you close your eyes and picture holding a letter that changes your life, the feeling in your chest is the same energy that spun galaxies into being. It's not pretending, it's conscious creation. You're touching the blueprint before it becomes brick and stone. And that's why Neville insisted you must treat imagination as sacred, not casual. Once this idea sinks in, every idle thought feels like wet cement, soft now, but solid later. The question then becomes, if imagination is God's power in you, what happens when you doubt it? That leads to a truth most people don't want to admit. If imagination truly is the creative power of God, then doubting it isn't just harmless skepticism, it's disbelief in the way God works. Neville Goddard was clear: you can't separate faith in God from faith in imagination. They're the same current. So when you say, "I'm not sure this imagining thing works," you're quietly rejecting the divine process already operating in you. It's like planting a seed and then digging it up every morning to see if it's growing. That constant disturbance, those silent "what if it doesn't work" thoughts, prevents the natural unfolding. The law of assumption demands you live in the end without looking over your shoulder for proof. In other words, if you're doubting imagination, you're interrupting the flow of creation before it's complete. Many unknowingly hold this split belief: God can do anything, but I don't trust my inner vision. They're waiting for God to act, while ignoring that His action comes through their inner vision. It's the spiritual equivalent of asking for light and refusing to flip the switch. The divine creative power needs your assumption, your feeling, to crystallize into reality. And here's where it gets tricky. Most of this doubt isn't conscious. It's the result of subtle programming we've carried for years, shaping how we see imagination itself. That's the next layer we need to peel back. From childhood, most people are taught to stop daydreaming and be realistic. It sounds harmless, but this is the start of a deep conditioning against the very tool that shapes reality. Neville Goddard warned that the world trains us to dismiss imagination as fantasy, even though imagination creates reality. By the time we're adults, we've learned to put faith in hard evidence and doubt the unseen, which is the exact opposite of how the divine creative power works. Think back to school. Imagination was encouraged in art class but dismissed in serious subjects. Creativity was framed as play, not power, and so the mind split. Faith in God was allowed in church, but faith in imagination, that was for fiction. This conditioning makes living in the end feel awkward at first, because we've been taught that the unseen isn't trustworthy. Even in families of faith, you might hear phrases like, "Don't get your hopes up," or "Life doesn't work like that." These sound like wisdom, but they're silent killers of belief in your own divine creative process. The law of assumption becomes hard to apply when deep down you've been programmed to treat imagination as a toy instead of God in motion. Once you see this programming for what it is, you realize it's not that people lack faith, they've just been taught to put it in the wrong place. And the proof that imagination is real? It's already all around you. Look around right now. Every detail of your life began as an invisible picture. The chair you're sitting on, the clothes you wear, even the phone in your hand, each existed in someone's mind before it took physical form. Neville Goddard would call this living proof that imagination creates reality. Whether you've done it consciously or not, your inner pictures have been shaping your world since the beginning. Think about personal moments too. That friendship that started with a thought of reaching out, the job you once dreamed about before the interview, or even the challenges you feared that eventually showed up. In every case, the seed was planted in imagination first. You may not have called it the law of assumption, but you were living in the end without even realizing it. This is why doubting imagination is like doubting gravity. It's working whether you acknowledge it or not. The divine creative power doesn't pause because you ignore it. It simply mirrors the pictures and feelings you hold most often. That's why Neville insisted we take responsibility for what we allow ourselves to dwell on. It's not positive thinking, it's precise creation. And when you combine imagination with its missing ingredient, you stop creating by accident and start creating with certainty. That missing ingredient, Neville called it the real secret. Neville Goddard's famous phrase, "Feeling is the secret," wasn't meant to be catchy, it was the entire blueprint. Imagination without feeling is like a script never performed. The law of assumption works because when you imagine and feel as if it's already done, your inner state aligns with the end result. That alignment is what signals the divine creative power to bring it into form. Think about the last time you replayed a memory that made you smile. You didn't just see it, you felt it in your body. That same mechanism works in reverse. Feel a future event as if it's happening now, and you impress it on your subconscious. This is why Neville stressed that living in the end must be emotional, not mechanical. Without feeling, imagination remains an empty shell. You might picture the new home, the healed relationship, or the answered prayer, but without the emotional conviction, the scene stays flat. Feeling is what turns the picture into a living reality within, and once it's alive within, the outer must match it. That's the law of assumption in action. When you approach imagination this way, it stops being pretend time and becomes sacred practice, which is exactly how Neville recommended we treat it, like holy ground in the mind. Neville Goddard often compared imaginal acts to prayer, not in a formal, rigid way, but as a moment of direct communion with God. If imagination is God and feeling is the secret, then your quiet moments of creation are not daydreams, they're sacred appointments. You enter that inner space with reverence, knowing you're stepping into the workshop where reality is shaped. Here's a simple practice. Find a place where you won't be disturbed, close your eyes and breathe until your body feels light. Then, create a short, simple scene that implies your desire is already fulfilled. Don't overcomplicate it. If it's financial freedom, maybe you're holding the paid-off statement in your hand. If it's love, maybe you're feeling the warmth of a hand in yours. The key is to live in the end inside that scene, feeling the emotions as if it's happening right now. Don't rush it. Don't check if it's working. Treat this time like you would a deep, meaningful conversation with someone you love. You're not there to prove anything. You're there to experience it fully. When you honor imagination this way, it changes your relationship with it. You begin to notice that something subtle starts shifting in your day-to-day life, and that's when the signs of growing trust begin to appear. One of the first signs is that your doubts don't shout as loudly as they used to. You may still hear the old voice whisper, What if it doesn't work? But now it passes like background noise instead of a command. Neville Goddard said that faith in imagination grows quietly, often showing itself in subtle emotional shifts rather than big dramatic moments. Another sign is the depth you feel during imaginal acts. At first, scenes might feel forced, like you're trying too hard. But over time, you slip into them naturally, almost like remembering something real. That's when feeling is the secret starts to click. You're no longer creating from hope, but from certainty. You'll also start to notice synchronicities, overheard conversations, sudden opportunities, or coincidences that align perfectly with what you've been imagining. Neville taught that these are bridges of incidents, proof that the divine creative power is rearranging the outer world to match your inner assumption. And perhaps the most beautiful sign, you begin to feel a partnership with God, not as someone you plead with from a distance, but as the very life within you guiding the process. Which makes the next challenge all about letting go of something most people cling to. One of the hardest habits to break is waiting for outer evidence before allowing yourself to believe. Neville Goddard was clear. The law of assumption requires you to live in the end before the physical proof shows up. If you're still scanning the horizon for confirmation, you're signaling to the divine creative power that you don't yet believe it's done. It's a bit like baking a cake and opening the oven every minute to check if it's ready. You let the heat escape, slowing the process. In imagination, that heat is your sustained feeling. If you keep interrupting it by looking for results, you weaken the assumption before it can harden into fact. Faith in imagination means letting the scene play out inside without the constant demand for signs. This doesn't mean ignoring the world around you. It means reading it differently. When something neutral happens, you stop interpreting it as proof it's not working. Instead, you trust the bridge of incidents is still forming, even if you can't yet see the full picture. The certainty lives in you, not in the circumstances. Once you break the need for proof, your faith feels lighter, freer. And when that happens, something profound shifts. You realize that believing in God has always meant believing in His method within you. Neville Goddard never separated the two. To believe in God is to believe in your imagination. The law of assumption works because imagination is God, shaping reality through the pictures and feelings you sustain. If you trust the Creator but doubt the inner process, you're leaving half the equation unfinished. Faith isn't just in who God is, it's in how He works through you. When you truly see imagination as divine creative power, you stop treating it like a mental hobby and start treating it as holy ground. You realize that every time you live in the end, you're aligning yourself with the way creation has always operated, from the galaxies above to the quiet desires in your heart. The same force that imagined the universe imagined you. And here's the shift. Prayer stops being a list of requests and becomes an act of assumption. You're no longer asking God to do something out there. You're accepting that it's already done in here and trusting the bridge of incidents to unfold. This is faith in its purest form. Once you understand this, the contradiction disappears. Believing in God is believing in imagination. Doubt one and you doubt the other. Trust both and you step fully into the role you were always meant to play, co-creator of your life. So now the question isn't whether imagination works, it's whether you'll dare to treat it as the divine power Neville Goddard said it is. If imagination is God moving through you, what have you been creating lately? Have you been living in the end or living in doubt? Every scene you play in your mind is a seed. Every feeling you sustain is the sunlight or shadow that shapes its growth. You don't need more signs to begin. You need the courage to trust the process that's been at work since the first page of Genesis. Faith in God means faith in His method, and that method is alive in you right now. So take what you've heard today and use it. Start tonight. Step into the scene, feel it as done, and let the bridge of incidents carry you. And if this awakens something in you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because this is only the beginning of what you're capable of creating.